Hey everybody, Jack Club's Painting here. Today we're going to start a new tutorial series on different Space Marine chapters. I'm getting a lot of requests for doing some Space Marine chapters, and we're going to start this off with one of my favorites, the Ultramarines. And as per usual, we're going to start the model with some Spinal Res black primer made by Badger Airbrush Company. Just going to go all over the model, keeping everything nice and thin, nice and smooth. Priming's pretty easy. You've seen it enough times here on the channel and over on Twitch that you should kind of know what I'm doing by now. Today, this video is going to focus on just the color scheme of the Ultramarines. So we're going to be focusing on the armor. And to start off, we're going to go with a really deep, rich blue. This is from Vallejo Mecha Color. It's called Titan Blue. And I've got it in the airbrush here with some flow improver. And when we're doing our base coat, I'm going to try to lock in our high contrast style by only spraying our base coat at a kind of 90 degree to a 45 degree and higher. So I'm trying not to spray at an underneath the model angle, if that makes sense. So by the time you're done with this base coat, you should be able to turn the model upside down and still see that black paint showing through in all of the shadows and the recesses. And then from there, we're going to go up to our mid-tone blue, which is going to be Magic Blue from Vallejo Game Air. A little bit brighter than the normal Ultramarine blue, but I like this style a little bit more than the more basic style that you see Ultramarines in. Like, the harsher contrast between the shades of blue is going to end up making our nice royal blue armor look much cooler than having the kind of normal Ultramarine blue as our mid-tone. And again, I'm attacking this model at a pretty high angle, about a 45, making sure to leave the super dark black recesses and then the slightly darker than this Titan blue in all of our shaded areas, and not trying to completely cover that up. We're locking in our gradient here. Alright, now we're going to do our first targeted highlight with some Vallejo Game Air Electric Blue. This is really bright compared to our Magic Blue, and when I say targeted, you can see on the model that I'm focusing on these small radial highlights on the brightest parts of the model. Just focusing on those, not going all over like we did with our two undercoats, you can call them, or our base coats. With these targeted highlights, we're focusing on different areas. You can see like those little exhaust bells in the top of the shoulders, the top of the helmet and things like that. We're focusing on those and targeting those areas with the airbrush to create that really high contrast style. So we're going from basically pure black through different blue colors all the way up to this electric blue. And for our last highlight, I'm going to mix some Slow Fuse Gaming White directly into our electric blue mix to get it really, really bright. Basically an off-white with a little bit of blue tint, and very carefully, very lightly focus even tighter on these little radial highlights to pop them out ever so much more with this kind of off-white paint. And this is probably the hardest step out of this entire armor workup, because if you go too much with this, it kind of screws up the look. So be very careful when you're doing this. Take your time, don't get frustrated. Make sure that your paint is nice and thin so that you're not trying to over force it with the airbrush and get some speckling or anything like that. And again, just focus on these brightest radial highlights, like not every single little radial highlight, but just the brightest of the bright. So only on places where we want that armor color to really pop out. And the reason that we're going even brighter with this is because when you do these types of airbrush workups, you want to go a little bit brighter than you're comfortable with before you put a wash on there, because the wash is going to darken everything down. So when we put our wash on, it's going to take that kind of over the top off-white paint down into our blue range and tie everything together. Before we do that, we're going to lock in our trim. We're doing some Necro Gold from Scale 75. You know how much I love this paint. And we're just going to get our shoulder pad trim and our little chest eagle, chest aquila, skull and wings, whatever it might be on the model. The gold trim for Ultramarines is the second company, but if you guys want to do a specific company, like third or fourth or eighth or whatever, just look in your codex and it'll tell you what all those trim colors are so that you can be right on point. But for this guy, we're just doing the kind of box standard Ultramarines color scheme, so we're using gold. And the last thing that we're going to do before we put a wash on this guy is take some model color black and focus on the joints of his armor. This is a personal opinion. I prefer the dark rubber style joints for Loyalist Space Marines, and I like metallic joints on Chaos Space Marines, but it honestly, it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want here. If you want to do some gunmetal joints, then feel free to do so, because basically for these joints all we're really doing is creating some color separation between the different pieces of armor. So as long as that color that you decide to use for your joints is enough of a difference between your armor color, then you're good to go. Just remember that if you have something like black armor, you don't really want to do pure black joints because you're not getting any color separation. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so for our wash, we're using the Army Painter system. This is the Quick Shade Wash Mixing Medium and some blue tone, and then a little bit of dark tone to keep everything nice and dark, because that quick shade medium does tend to brighten things up a bit. You can see it's mostly black with a little bit of blue, so it's just dark enough to work with our kind of darker blue shadows on this Ultramarines workup. And I'm just going to put this all over. The quick shade mixing medium helps our wash not settle on any large flat surfaces. You can kind of see in the video, when I start putting it on those flat surfaces, it just doesn't want to stick there. It flows directly into the recesses. And then for really clean Space Marine stuff, what I like to do is just dip my brush in some water and kind of move some of that wash around to clean up our big flat areas, like our shoulder pads and our those hip pads and his knees and things like that. Just help move some of that wash away so that it doesn't end up staining as it dries. And once I got everything where I want it, I can dry the brush off and come in and wick away any excess, because you don't want super huge pools of wash on the model. And when I was doing this, I decided that the wash was not dark enough around the gold, so I'm just doing a little pen wash here with some Secret Weapon soft body black around our gold metallic pieces. And this one was a little tricky. These easy to build Primaris Marines have this weird kind of bulge right next to the shoulder pad trim that just doesn't really want to accept wash the way that a normal shoulder pad will. So like that's gonna look a little weird compared to a normal shoulder pad, but definitely not the end of the world. It's gonna end up looking fine as is. And once that pin wash is on there and set up, then we're just gonna let him dry out. Alright, and now we're going to do some edge highlighting with some Vallejo model color Azure, which is a very light blue color, like a very light blue-gray, almost very pastel. And just going to go in and catch some of these hard edges, and sometimes you have to scribe some lines, and sometimes you can just use the side of the brush to kind of trace on that hard edge. And I'm not gonna go overboard. Like, I'm one of those people where I prefer less edge highlighting rather than edge highlighting everything. Like, I think minimal highlighting on the edges looks a little bit nicer, especially when you do a really clean airbrush workup. You don't want to put too much edge highlighting on these models. So I'm just catching any really bright hard edge, and you'll notice that except for the fingers, I'm not edge highlighting any flat curved surfaces because it doesn't make sense. Like, you only want edge highlights on hard right angle or that kind of angle edge. So that's the only thing I'm hitting, and I think with these new Primaris Marines, the minimal look is the way to go. Like, I think it looks really good. And you can see I got some on his little forehead there, so I'm just going to use the good old finger eraser to get that off. Alright, and then we're going to go to highlighting up our gold. This is Elven Gold from Scale 75, really bright, shiny yellow gold. I like to thin this out quite a bit and just kind of glaze it over top of our Necro Gold to get a really nice, even transition between the two, because the Necro Gold is really dark and the Elven Gold is really bright and shiny. So if you put it on kind of thick, you'll have this really harsh transition between the two golds. And sometimes that doesn't look very good, so that's why I like to keep it super thin and kind of, not a real glaze, kind of a half-ass glaze, and just kind of transition those colors a little bit, and then catch those little feathers on the chest eagle with it. And the last thing that we're going to do is a matte varnish through the airbrush. I like doing matte varnishes because not only does it protect the paint that you just put down, but it unifies the finish of all of the different colors and maybe paint brands that you're using. Since I used a couple of different paint lines and brands on this model, I like doing the matte varnish, and it unifies the finish on all of it and brings it together into a super nice clean look. Alright, here he is. The armor is complete. Like I said, this video is just about the armor and color scheme, so started off with Titan Blue from Vallejo Mecha Color, then some Magic Blue from Vallejo Game Air, going into Electric Blue, and then some Azure from Model Color. And then our golds were Necro Gold and Elven Gold from Scale 75, the Army Painter Wash System with some Dark Tone, Blue Tone, and the Quick Shade Mix Medium, and a little bit of Soft Body Black from Secret Weapon, followed by a matte varnish. We're going to be doing pretty much all of the Space Marine chapters, so look for those videos when they come out, and I'll see you all later.